Okay, let me introduce myself really quickly. My name is Jeff. I am a UX strategy teacher at the Fountain Institute. I love to read. My spirit animal is a raccoon. I'm from the US and I've been working in design, building products for about 15 years and working in ed tech specifically for about 10 years. I feel like I get to kind of, as a teacher of design, I get to kind of read the books you don't have time to read. And so these particular are some of the books that will be influencing the talk today and the way that I teach UX strategy. I also make a meme every single day and post it on LinkedIn. So feel free to follow me on that weird journey. And this is one of the most famous memes that I've made, the most viral, let's say. And it's a mindset that I think we really need to talk about when we get into UX strategy. I fight for the user is something you might hear a relatively junior designer say. The problem with I fight for the user is that the business doesn't like it because they hired you to do what they say. And the users don't really care either. They're not really that loyal to you. You know, they've downloaded the competitive app. They don't even remember the name of your company. So this idea of, I fight for the user can be a little detrimental. You can get kind of doubly screwed here. And when we're thinking about UX strategy, we want to move beyond this. We're going to talk a lot about the business perspective and business goals being kind of the primary driver of our work. And that's something, sort of a mindset shift that I think should happen with UX strategy. So if you're a little bit more junior, that you may not be ready for that yet, but just consider that this mindset of a fight for the user and always pushing user might not go over so well within the organization. And that's one of many memes I will share with you. So why UX strategy matters now, and why in this moment should we be excited about UX strategy? Well, strategy has a really nice definition that I always share here. This is one of my favorites: a general plan to achieve one or more long-term or overall goals under conditions of uncertainty. And right now, there is so much uncertainty in this field. This coming wave of AI is washing over all of us. We don't really know how to deal with it. So I think it's a great time to be thinking and working with strategy because it deals with this exact moment. You want to wait for that window of opportunity, that perfect wave. You want to be ready and you want to hit it and ride through and see a lot of impact that way. So now's a great time to start thinking about how you're going to work with this coming opportunity / challenge / problem of AI. And it's this one interface here that's changed so much of our work. How can I help you today? Maybe don't take my job, ChatGPT. This is a very simple interface. It's not even that well designed, in my opinion. It's quite dark. It reminds me of working on MS-DOS when I was first using computers as a kid. There's a lot of opportunity here, literally, for this one thing shaking up our industry to get better designed. Only recently can you send it photos and kind of do anything besides using text. So I think we're still at where the wave hasn't broken yet, and there's still lots of opportunities in this coming wave of AI. Also, the shape of this innovation itself is very technical and very physical. OpenAI is building so many data centers. There's all the chips that you need. The whole thing is very intense from a sort of physical matter perspective. And also there's this giant competition, and only the big companies can do this. This is like high stakes games. They're spending a ton of money just to try and keep up, just to try and launch this one feature. And every feature kind of seems the same, and all the tools kind of work in the same way. There's not really much differentiation. And also they're spending so much money. I think OpenAI says they will spend $1 trillion before it's all over with. 50 billion is a number you keep hearing people throwing around like willy-nilly. I'm going to build this data center. So it's a lot of tech, a lot of money, and not very much talked about with regards to design or UX, which I think will come eventually. I made this about a year ago. I still feel like this is sadly relevant. The design job market is being affected by AI. Of course, AI is now starting to actually take some jobs or make people not want to hire. There's a lot going on also, like leadership roles are disappearing, design managers going away, especially the chief design officer is disappearing. Some people are applying to jobs well below their level. It's a difficult time to be a designer right now. If you're unemployed or looking for a job in the last year, I feel for you. It's not just you. It's a very difficult time. But with that comes opportunity. And whenever you see people commenting on what AI will do, how does AI affect design, what's design in the age of AI, all these articles, I swear every single time someone says something like this: As AI takes over, designers can focus on higher level strategic thinking. Everyone's saying this, but no one's really telling you how to do that. What does it look like? How do you, as a UXer, work on strategy? That's really what I hope this session can be today. And this comes from John Maeda, who's a really good source on future trends. I hope to provide you what that looks like, what strategic thinking looks like, because I think it's really important right now, especially if you want to stand out from a lot of the other designers in this field. So what UX strategy is and what it isn't. I want to take you back to 2003, because I think it's got a lot of similar shapes to what's happening in the AI wars happening right now. Let's go back to 2003 and think about the console wars. The PS2 and the original Xbox were killing it. They were making all the money, they were taking all the market share, and they were also competing with each other in this really competitive way. And when we think about strategy, competition is a big part of it. And I think before we even use the word UX strategy, this is in 2003, UX strategy kind of started, let's say, in like 2016. So it was way before. But I think what developed in these console wars is a really good example of UX strategy that I want to use to teach you what it looks like. This is actually what it looked like when you were using a PS2 or an Xbox. I feel like this image represents it well. Dark room, you got the plastic Solo cup. Maybe this is in a college dorm room. They're playing the game by themselves is kind of the hint here. This comes from Reddit. This was the market for PlayStation 2 and Xbox and the resulting consoles that came after. This is what they were all fighting over. This big competition was over 18 to 30-year-old men, because that is the classic gamer persona. This is what everyone is spending their money on. If you were going to make a console that wasn't for this demographic, you would be considered throwing money away because all the money was here. So this is what PlayStation and Xbox were fighting over. Here's some examples of some of the games from that time. As you can see, the games are very much geared towards that male demographic, younger men. There's a lot of hardware involved in making these games. They're very big, immersive landscapes. They require like fancy graphic cards, and there was the DVD player on the PlayStation 2. There was the hard drive on the Xbox, and eventually there was the Xbox Live. You play your friends online with Halo. These were some pretty cool innovations, but they were pretty costly for both Sony and Microsoft. And because of the competition, they didn't always make that much profit. So it wasn't exactly the best market to jump into because these two were fighting for all the dominance. But I actually want you to think about what it might be like if you were Nintendo in 2003. So in the chat from here, next 10 minutes or so, I would love to just kind of see your thoughts. What I want you to do is think about yourself as working at an agency, offering this UX strategy services, this type of consulting services to Nintendo. And Nintendo has a good amount of money, but they're definitely not making money with their GameCube. And they want to come up with something new to sell more consoles for their next system. They have no idea what their next system should be like after the GameCube. It's still 2003, early, but they're hiring you, everyone in this info session. They're hiring you to figure out what that looks like. So I would love to see, in the chat, we have an idea. Great. I see Charlotte is typing. Keep those thoughts flowing in the chat. So what would you do? How would you combat this kind of Microsoft and Sony taking all the market value and all that work? What would you do? Yeah, Charlotte's already guessing. Appeal to more people. Wow, y'all are so good at this. Charlotte, great job. Before you get into a project like this, you might just think goal, and you might think, okay, how do I reach that? And you might cycle through your UX methods. You might think strategically and come up with something. Something I like to use is this diagram. Imagine it's like a football play zoomed out. You can kind of see what's happening. All your team is down here, and they do these actions that are focused by a strategy to reach a goal. And I really like this sort of framework and diagram when I'm thinking about strategy, because it tells you the difference between strategy and goals and strategy and actions, and how they focus these actions through the strategy to reach a goal. And that is what strategy does. UX strategy will focus your UX actions towards a goal. So what is the strategy here? Appeal to more people is the one Charlotte's put in the chat. Anyone have other ideas? Greg says propose thinking about solutions that aren't just solo play, reaching an audience different than 18 to 30-year-old men. Great. And I put that up here as a kind of hint. This is really kind of what we're competing against. So it seems like everyone is quite excited so far about competing and appealing to a different audience than this. This is called clustering, by the way, when all the competitors try and serve the same user persona, the same market, the same consumer. It's not a good place to be if you're trying to be strategic. You really want to think about differentiating. So appeal to everyone else. That's what Fabio was saying. And I think because you know what comes after GameCube, that's helping you out. But also remember that this was a condition of uncertainty for Nintendo. They did not know what would come after the GameCube. The GameCube was kind of too similar to the PlayStation and Xbox, but without technical capabilities. This is a picture from South Park. This is the sort of stereotype of the gamer. This is really what Microsoft and Sony was doing. So here, what I think we want to do, and a pretty good tip if you're doing strategy, is when your competitors zig, you zag. So if the UX strategy of your Xbox or PS2 looks something like this, and this is the persona, let's do something different, okay? And we're already starting to guess at it. I like that we see different stuff in the chat here. Tim is saying make consoles addicting somehow. So they keep buying more, make it cheaper and affordable, seeing what competitors are doing and why. So we want to do more research, maybe add more variety of game options, not just traditional masculine. These are all great ideas because we're starting to differentiate from what Microsoft and Xbox are doing. Our UX strategy is growing much stronger because it's growing much different. I'm going to skip ahead and give you what I think was the strategy at the time. So we're going to focus on family-friendly UX over technical specs because we don't have those technical specs. We're going to make it simple, social, and intuitive for non-gamers. So this is kind of two, let's say, principles that are really making up the core of what your strategy is. So you've sold this strategy to Nintendo. Okay, that's a pretty good strategy. Normally, you, of course, had lots of time and research to look at the business, the user, and the market, and all kinds of different things. But there we go. We kind of got it. And a lot of also great ideas in the chat here. Okay, so what actions should we take? The place where strategy becomes real is now when we have the strategy there. This kind of is the secret thing. You wouldn't show this outside the company and the agency pitching this to Nintendo. No one would see this outside of that. The public wouldn't see this, but they would see the actions. So what are the actions that you would take? Remember, we're trying to sell more consoles here. Think about that. What would you do if you were a designer and you had something like this? Much better than if you're a designer and you're just trying to copy Microsoft and Xbox and the Sony PS2. You might find yourself in that situation at a lot of companies where there is no strategy, that they just start trying to copy the competitors. That's a dead giveaway that you're not being very strategic. So now you have this, what do you do? It feels much different. You have something to guide you, something to help you make decisions. And I want to show you some of the actions that they took. I see Sam suggesting maybe beta test, making games for everyone, go out and talk to families and non-gamers. And that would be a big one. We want to figure out what the non-gamer needs because that's not established. It's kind of a new market. There really wasn't anything for non-gamers that was a console at this point. You know, maybe you could talk about how they play board games with their family or how they watch movies and get some inspiration there. And in fact, I think that's kind of what Nintendo ended up doing. So meet the Wii. Charlotte, you guessed it well. The Wii came after the GameCube. And take the strategy here. These are the actions they took. They really zagged. You know, all the other consoles and their competitors were black. They went with a white one. You know, they were using these complicated controllers like the Dreamcast, and the Xbox had so many buttons. This had way fewer buttons. This was the little Wiimote. You could just point it at the screen, super intuitive. Even, you know, the grandma could figure that one out. You could add the nunchuck, or this didn't even have buttons at all. It was the Wii Fit. So it was super simple. Just stood on it and it interacted. And you could even play games that made you exercise, made you do yoga. This kind of antisocial sitting at your desk in your room was really flipped on its head with the Wii Fit. They talked about channels. When you first loaded the console, you saw these channels, things like the weather, you know, suggesting that it's not just always about playing games for, you know, 20 hours at a time. Of course, the Miis are famous little avatars. This was really a clever way to solve this issue of it's not intuitive when you're playing a game, who's who, you know? If you're playing two players, who's who? Grandma doesn't know. Well, if you have an avatar that looks like grandma, she knows really quickly. And this microcopy, I love this microcopy. This is kind of a famous meme. The Wii itself has so much great little images like this. Why not take a break? You can pause the game by pressing plus. So you can stop playing the game. You can be social. You can go outside. They're kind of really pushing you towards this other way of playing games that's not sitting in a room by yourself. And they really opened up a new market here. You have the old market of 18 to 30-year-old men. We keep that for the boys' bedroom. We put that off to the side. But when the family plays in the center of the house, we play in the living room. We're the non-gamers, the whole family. And here I love this picture. This is from a 97-year-old woman who really loved her Wii. I think that was a little bit of a surprise. Like, no one really expected people to get grandparents to play a console, but it worked. And the Wii was super successful. It opened up a huge market. There's obviously more people in a family than just 18 to 30-year-old men, which means there are more people that can buy your console. And this UX strategy was really successful. The worldwide sales went from 2006 there when it launched, shot up and even doubled over what some of their competitors did even with the next console. So the Xbox 360 and the PS2 came after, and they still couldn't sell nearly as well as the Wii. And this strategy lasted for several years, and I think it was really pivotal. And this is a good example of what a UX strategy can do. What do you notice here? Like what Nintendo did, they did more with less. Like they didn't have tech. They didn't have these DVD players. They didn't have all this kind of fancy process for making the chips better every single year so that the console would be great. What they did have was simplicity. They did have storytelling. They had family-friendly fun. They really played to the strengths of Nintendo with this strategy. And that's what you want to do. You want to take the power, the levers that you have at your company, and really emphasize turn your weaknesses, what might seem like weaknesses, into strengths. Kind of turn a bug into a feature. Say like, oh, we're not trying to do this heavy technical stuff. We're trying to make things fun. Like Charlotte's saying like, yeah, like it's true that your mom couldn't use the Nintendo 64 controller, but she could figure out the Wii. Actually, I think it's a proof of the intuitiveness, the simpleness of it. So this is really what you want to do. You want to take those business goals. In this example was to sell more consoles. That was here. And then you want to take those consumer needs. In this example, the consumer need of family gaming. And when you find that combination, that is your UX strategy. That's not intuitive how it applies to your working situation. This means you might have to say no to consumer needs. You might have to say no to some personas and really focus on one specific persona, the one that aligns with your business goal. And you might find this happening a lot where, in this case, they're opening it up. So it's kind of a broader market, but sometimes you're looking for an even smaller market than what exists. If you had to compete with the Wii, your UX strategy would probably be to focus on a more specific consumer group. You're trying to differentiate what you do. And I hope that gives you an example of what you can do at your company with UX strategy. It can be really powerful. There are not many strategies at a company that are user specific, that really focus on what the consumer is wanting and needing. And hopefully you're already doing a good fair bit of research around those things at your company, maybe doing user research, something like that. And that will give you a wealth of information to make a much better strategy. And I think it can be a real superpower for a UX designer to do something like this, especially if it can be, coming from the top. Obviously everyone in Nintendo was following this strategy. It wasn't just the user experience, it was the hardware as well. They made it cheaper. They did lots of things that made it accessible. But I think that UX strategy was really helpful for making something that was completely new, for innovating. We always talk about innovation, but this is a good example about how a very specific strategy can do that. And I want to talk about this shape again, because what's in the middle, that strategy about making things simple, social, and intuitive, non-gamers, that's a decision-making framework, which is a fancy way to say it helps us say yes to some things and no to other things. And a framework can sometimes be a visual, doesn't have to be just words or policies, but it can be anything that helps you make decisions, guide your actions, and reach a goal. And it's telling you, do not do some things, but do others. And that's really what you want with your UX strategy, a decision-making framework. So after that little bit of case study, I can now give you a definition that I like, a definition that I use in my course. A UX strategy is a decision-making framework that guides UX actions to reach business goals through experiences that people love. It's still about experiences that people love. We are trying to reach business goals, but we're trying to find some consumer needs that align. So we have that win-win. We both provide things to the consumers and we both reach our business goals. And that sort of win-win is what we're looking for with UX strategy. Not easy to do, but if you can find it, it is extremely powerful. Even if it's a strategy that only guides your design team, that can be really powerful to get everyone's actions aligned. But even better if it's something that influences the whole company to focus on a specific user group. One thing, though, a few things that UX strategy is not. It is not just advanced UX methods. While you may use an advanced UX method, it really depends on the strategy and the goal. You saw that 3-part thing I'm showing you. The goal and the strategy would be more influential than what actions you will take, which methods you will use. So it could be as simple as doing interviews, or it could be that you never do interviews. It really depends on the strategy. Which brings me to the next one, is that a UX strategy is not universal. I've seen a UX influencer selling, a list of 75 UX strategies that you can use at your company. I'm very suspicious of that because there's a whole lot of research and a whole lot of customization that goes into a good UX strategy. It should definitely be unique to the company or the org. Maybe if you're doing these every day at an agency, just churning them out, doing 10 a month, maybe you might start to repeat some things. But the idea here is that it's really specific to the situation. And lastly, it's a phase before every project. A lot of people think that this is true. It's not a phase before every project. The whole point and the whole power is that you do this thing once and it guides projects for several years. In this case, we could do that strategy before they launch the Wii, and it could guide everything they do with the Wii, even everything they do with the sequel, the Wii U. And it was kind of the same strategy there. So even in that example, it was something like, 6, 7, 8 years, I think, that it guided it. And I would say a good rule of thumb is it should guide for 2 to 5 years. So it's not some pre-phase work where you always do strategy before you do a project. You want to do it once for your team, and then you want to use it for a long time. And you can adapt it, of course, but it needs to be something that's guiding multiple projects in long term. A lot of my students get confused on this. So these are 3 things that you'll see people confuse about UX strategy. Okay, so what's it look like when a designer runs a strategy project? How can we do things in a more designerly way? Is it the same as if I do something for the product owner role, like if I do a product strategy? I would say it's going to look different. And here's how it typically looks. Meet Chad. Chad is the CEO that I'm sure you will find reminds you of many people who you've worked with. When Chad does a strategy, he goes off in the boardroom with his bros, and they all take their gut instincts and their years of experience and their beautiful business cards, and they just brainstorm the way to a strategy. And every single time, the strategy ends up looking like this. When you brainstorm your way to a strategy, it just looks like a lot of nice things. Because they're in the room, they're like, oh, don't forget about this. The board's like, oh, we want to make sure we talk about growth. And they're like, oh, we should talk about sustainability so that the employees don't quit. And they're like, of course, we're going to throw in AI. And then Chad's really about, reaching high sales volume. So he's like, we got to be the best. We got to make lots of sales. This is what more strategies look like this than I think you would realize. When in my course, I give feedback on the student strategies, but I often look at their company strategies so that we can align with those. And I would say at least half of them look like this. So this is a bit of a joke, but there's a lot of bad strategy out there. And you're going to have to work with that strategy, but you need to be better. Be better than Chad. Do better. What Chad doesn't realize is behind all of these pillars, reaching all these pillars, there's a big obstacle. There's challenges to getting to these pillars. He's not thinking about it. He's just thinking about cool buzzwords, and he's going to force the company to get there. He doesn't understand how to do strategy right. He's not a strategy person. He's not doing it for a job, just does it, once every 5 years. So he doesn't realize there's challenges involved. If you fail to identify and analyze the obstacles, you don't have a strategy. Instead, you have either a stretch goal, a budget, or a list of things you wish would happen. This is exactly what Chad did with his 4 pillars. This is Richard Remelt, probably the most designerly non-UX strategy guy out there. He doesn't do UX strategy. He does business strategy, consulting, and that sort of thing. But the way that he talks about strategy, you see a lot of design in it. He talks about, doing your research before you do any design. He talks about the strategy itself is kind of a design. So if you're looking to get into strategy, Good Strategy, Bad Strategy is a great book to get started in. I've read it 3 times. I based a lot of the course around it because I didn't find a lot out there on UX strategy specifically, but I found that there's a lot of UX and design thinking in the way that some strategists talk about how they do strategy. So This guy's got a great designerly approach to strategy. So here are some examples of challenges. We want to make sure we identify those obstacles and don't just put a bunch of idealistic, vision-y type of pillars into our UX strategy. So here's some examples. Maybe there's a new technology, AI, that you want to integrate. Maybe users are adopting, but really slowly. Maybe a competitor went out of business. And these are green because these aren't bad things. These aren't problems, but they're still kind of hard to grasp. And they'll be difficult to use in our strategy. So there's still a challenge. And then they could be a little bit more negative, like, you just got fired 10% of the company. Maybe there's just too many UX bugs. You can't keep up with them. Maybe you're losing lots of users to a new competitor. These are really more traditionally problems, but they're much bigger than the average user problem. They're really more systemic problems. So the word challenge is helpful here because it keeps us from thinking about it as like a regular user problem, the one-off that we might come across in our user research. So I love this terminology for strategy projects. Shows us we can think bigger, shows us that we can turn problems into opportunities, and all these would be considered a challenge. And this is the thing you're trying to find when you're doing research before you come up with your strategy, your UX strategy. So what it looks like is this. You find all those challenges and you pick a key challenge. It should be both important and solvable. So it should be a big deal. It should be systemic. It should be a big barrier that your UX team, your company has. And it should be something that the people using this strategy can do something about. People should be able to make a dent in this strategy, in this challenge, because otherwise it gets a little bit demotivating. So you want to pick the right challenge, and you want to diagnose a way to overcome it. This key challenge, I like the mountain metaphor here. The guiding principles will kind of keep you on the right path and headed towards your business goal in this kind of visual metaphor. But let's say for example, this was like kind of keep it social, simple, and intuitive. That would be one guiding principle. Maybe another would be to like focus on the non-gamer. So you might have these two sentences keeping you overcoming that key challenge. And in the Wii example, the key challenge would be like, we can't keep up with the hardware capabilities of the Xbox or the PlayStation 2. So if we don't face that key challenge, we're going to think like, oh, we're going to do amazing stuff. Our strategy is this, this, this. But this brings you down to reality. You may not want to face this challenge, but you really need to when you're doing a strategy. So this is a way to make a much better UX strategy than maybe you would have ever started, just following this sort of approach here. There's a lot going on to make a strategy. If you're going to make a UX strategy, this is the way I would recommend you think about it. There is mostly the big share of your work is the research, but there's also a lot of co-creation. And I made this specifically for designers doing strategy because I think that you're typically a little lower on the totem pole. So co-creation is a really good way to bring in like your head of design, your product lead, people that are higher up. Hang on to the questions for now. I'm going to get to a whole session time later. So if you have a question, keep it in mind. I'll trigger a question thing later. But this is kind of a parallel process. So you're doing both research and co-creation, and that gets you to the launch of your strategy. But then you're not really done yet either, because you're not a CEO who can say like, okay, execute this, everyone go, I command you. Doesn't work, especially if you're not even the lead of your team. You're going to have to talk about these things and kind of test them, talk about them as experiments, work them slowly into the process. So these are the 3 tracks of strategy. I think these are really important if you're a designer wanting to do strategy in a designerly way. Even if you're doing something bigger than UX strategy, I think this is the process that you want to follow. This is what I teach in my course. How most designers mess up UX strategy. These are the rookie level mistakes that absolutely I made the first time. This is really describing what I did the first time I tried to do UX strategy. I read this book, UX Strategy. I kind of had an opening. I saw a way that I could do this at work. And I walked in with all my UX methods, and I was just going to like tackle those company problems. And in the end, I kind of felt like Zoolander pretending to be a coal miner. It's like cosplaying being a strategist, because I didn't have any methodology and didn't understand the goal, strategy, action, connection. And I just had my journey maps and qualitative research. And spoiler alert, a lot of non-designers don't care about your methods. So I just did a lot of things that felt strategic, and that's not enough. Another thing I messed up was I had my goals all wrong because I didn't think about them. I wasn't explicit with the goals I was trying to meet. I was just trying to do UX team stuff, trying to, you know, improve the design maturity and all that. But I wasn't focused on that. I didn't talk about that. So some of the team was just doing best practices from Medium, and some were just doing whatever they could to build their portfolio. And so we all had different goals, and we're all just doing stuff that felt strategic. And I thought that that was doing UX strategy at the time, but it absolutely wasn't. And I want to zoom in on these UX team goals, these in particular, because I think that this is something you might not think you're doing, but you're probably doing. If these are the things that drive your work, you're not being as strategic as you could be. Design maturity, fix the UX, doing proper research, whatever that means, improving accessibility. These are the types of things that I hear designers try and pitch when they're doing a UX strategy, or even trying to do, leadership work in UX. But people that are non-designers, non-UXers don't care about any of these terms. They don't understand these terms. And I think this is a really terrible way to get project or strategy or any type of leadership work approved in an organization. So don't focus on UX team goals. Design maturity is not what you should be aiming for. You shouldn't be trying to do like the best practices. You should really trying to reach business goals. So not UX team goals, but business goals. And if you can focus on that, that'll really help. That'll make 90% of your UX strategy projects much better. And then once you have your UX strategy, then you can pick which UX method, which actions, which tactics you actually want to take to be focused by that UX strategy. So really the goal comes first, the business goal, and then coming up with the strategy, and then you can see how to focus your actions. So it's kind of the order of it. And I definitely got that wrong the first time. So the biggest mistake in UX strategy is thinking it's about pursuing designer goals and doing advanced UX methods that feel strategic. So I want to give you another case study here of just a regular designer, like all of you, who was in delivery mode and moved to become a strategy expert. This is Costas. He was working at an agency where their client was a dental CAD, computer-aided drawing company. So that they're selling software to dentists where, dentists need to actually use these tools to make retainers and that sort of thing. And it was the situation where not many people could buy and use their tool because it was too hard to use. An analogy that he came up with after, explaining this to me and talking through his project was that it was kind of like he had a 1999 Photoshop as a client, and he wanted to bring them to like what Figma is today. And that's kind of what he was thinking could reach the business goal that they already kind of came with, which was that they wanted to open up their software to more users, kind of like the Wii. So this is the situation Costas was in. He actually took the course while he had them as a client, which I think was extremely useful because basically I just gave him feedback and he took the course to make a much better strategy than he would have done by himself. This is his giant data wall. We use a data wall to do research. This is in Miro. You can use FigJam. But this is where you start to gather all the stuff you're learning and researching and discovering about your strategy. So this is a big part of the course is, gathering the things, talking to your executive team or your leaders and asking them what they think strategy is and what they think the challenges are, and doing some research on your own, looking at the market, looking at the business, looking at the users, doing all this type of work in the course. And I'll give you kind of like templates and methods that can guide you. But the real point here is that a lot of research really helps here. And what we end up in our course is called a proto strategy. So this is a canvas, which I can give you. It's free. You can download it. But I designed it mainly for the course to help students get through a strategy project and know that they're getting all the right stuff covered. So if you follow these 9 steps, do all these 9 things, you have the main stuff covered for what you need in a strategy. But it's not really polished. It's just kind of like the core idea. So we call it a proto strategy, like a prototype of a strategy. And then what Costas did was take this strategy, proto strategy with all my feedback all over it, and he turned it into a little more polished of a presentation. And he started to bring his stakeholders in, bring the clients in, and he's talking about this theory that he's developing. Costas really focused on is like some of the organizational design they needed in order to get to Figma. So it was really like back-end processes, which is something UX strategy can deal with, not just the external user stuff like the Wii, but also like the processes that the team follows. So I thought that was really clever. Had a very, very convincing argument for what the presentation would be. And then he did something that I think is also really clever and indicative of what a UX strategist should do. Here's the words he was using: expand the customer base, engagement, optimize, utilization. Notice that there are not let's say, average UX cultural words here. He's using kind of the business version of all these things. But look behind it and you can see the UX concept. Expand the customer base is like grow the users. Increase engagement is get them logging in more. Optimizing workflows is a kind of a more attractive way to say make better software and better user flows. Utilization is another word for usability. And so I thought it was really clever that he used these words and he kind of translated what he did in the course, what he found in the course into, as Sam says here in the chat, business lingo. So this is really key, I think, when you're a strategist, because you're kind of the connective tissue. A UX strategist is a connective tissue between the UX team, the UX people that work on it, product designers, and the business stakeholders. So you really want to be thinking and talking in their language. And if you can take that extra step, like Kostas did in my course, it's going to have a much better success rate. And in fact, they love the strategy. And whenever there was an opportunity to do another project related to strategy, it wasn't even UX, it was a M&A, a mergers and acquisition strategy. And they picked Kostas because they were like, you did a great job in the first one, go for it. It's really hard actually to get experience doing a strategy project because every 2 to 5 years, right? Like how often do you get a chance? So the course gives you a chance to do it with feedback. So that brings me to, what is the Fountain Institute course like? This is the way I teach, and I think it can be useful even if you're not taking the course. These 3 tracks of strategy, as I said, I think these are kind of really 3 skills that you have to learn. How to do research, how to do collaboration workshops, and how to do testing and how to look at data. These are all really important with strategy. And in the end, these are also really useful skills outside of strategy. So you might see that one of these 3 tracks is more interesting, or maybe you're stronger in. You can actually just lean on that, and that can be kind of your way to do strategy. But I recommend you getting pretty good at all 3, but you might want to really lean into one as your specialty. So I think it's a great way to try out 3 different ways of being a designer. It's 6 weeks. I mentioned the strategy canvas. This is kind of the 9 steps to get there. There's several other templates that I give you as well, and tons of videos. I think like 37 videos. The whole thing takes around 30 hours, which doesn't seem like a lot. It might feel like a lot when you're doing it, but 30 hours total and you have your first strategy. You don't have to share that. You can keep that to yourself. I recommend that you share it like Kostas did, because just associating yourself with a strategy at your company, even if it's not the best, is going to be like, it's going to make them think of you next time there's a strategy project where they need a strategy or something more strategic. So this is something you can do. I offer the strategy canvas for free, a lot of these as well for free, and I'll share those at the end of this talk. So you can just do this yourself. You don't have to pay for a course to get access to some of these things. But what makes Fountain Institute unique is we do lots of live workshops with lots of interactions. Small classes, we use this tool Butter. That's why I used it today. Classes a lot like this, but there's more workshop, more interaction, not just me talking. I try to talk like 10% of the class. So it's a little bit different than today, but the same time, whatever time it is for you now, that's when we'll have class. It's 2 hours, and students always say that it feels like 20 minutes because we do so many different things. I have a little bit of ADHD, so I think this is also like the way that I teach. I like to go boom, 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 and so like it just flies by, and then 2 hours are done, and you don't even realize it. Also, the course project, really important. I'm a big fan of project-based learning. The learning is not going to stick otherwise. No video, book, whatever is going to matter if you don't actually do something and create something. So we work on a strategy project, and that project is based on your company. So you're going to create a project for your company, or for, if you're working in an agency, for a client. And you don't have to share that with them, but you need to make it as real as possible so that you care and so that it's more realistic. And I'll give you feedback all over your data wall. I'll give you feedback every single week. And what's nice is that I'm starting to see trends. I've taught like 100 people this at this point. So I'm seeing where designers go wrong and what they do that isn't quite the right approach, part of what I'm sharing with you today. And so I can give you this really solid feedback, which is a bit like paying a strategy consultant. On the live workshops, they manage to keep the live classes engaging and fun, even after a long day at work. And Maureen's a pretty typical student in our course. I think in general, when you do UX strategy, it's good to be at least close to senior, because you need to kind of have mastered some of the normal stuff before you switch into the strategic. So I'd recommend being at least close to senior before you get into UX strategy. And then I had the opportunity to work on real context for my environment, and I got relevant feedback. Overall, I think the course was fantastic. And I think Aneta, she did a strategy that was a little bigger than UX strategy. She did, I think it was like a sustainability strategy for a company, which had a lot of UX thinking in it, but she wanted to call it that. And I think that was really useful for her to have something that she could just hand over at the end of the course. And this is something I teach in the course also, is like, don't get too hung up on UX strategy, the title. You may want to call it something different depending on what it is. But when you do strategy as a UXer, it's going to have that UX kind of part of it, that thinking and those sensibilities. So I'd love to see you in the course. It starts October 13th to November 24th. Early bird pricing expires next week, so it's a good time to join. Most of our students don't pay for it. They have their company pay. So I would suggest having your company pay. Everything's in English, just like this. It's a lot like this, 2 hours. So if you have this experience is something that excites you, if you think you want to do UX strategy, then that's a great way to do it, where your company is likely to pay. We're very, friendly for the managers. They like what they see when they look at our website. So it's quite easy to get approval. I would just encourage you to start practicing UX strategy in any way. Strategy, I think, is like swimming. You can't learn it by reading about it. You really have, at some point, you have to dive in. So I would encourage you to dive in any small way that you can. If it's talking to your boss, pitching it to your team. Now that you have this presentation, I think you can have a much better idea of what UX strategy is. So you can say, this is why I think it's valuable. And I encourage you to do that with your team. That's really what this presentation is all about, is getting you excited to consider starting UX strategy at your agency or at your company. And I think it can be very rewarding. If you're associated with that strategy, you will be seen as a business-friendly designer who really knows how to collaborate and get the team moving forward, which is very much leadership. Thanks a lot. This is where you can scan to find some of the free UX strategy resources that I talked about, Strategy Canvas, the other masterclass, and that sort of thing. If you scan this, you'll find all of that stuff. I'm a little over time, so I'll probably take a few more questions. So if you want to stick around and ask a question, I will go ahead and trigger that. Go. This is a way to write your question. I see that there's already some questions in the chat, so I'll probably go ahead and start answering those questions. But if you have to take off, I really appreciate you joining, and hopefully you'll get involved in some UX strategy in the future. I have a lot of content. If you want to follow me, I will keep posting stuff like this. So I'm happy to help you in that journey as you start it. So thanks a lot if you have to take off, and I'll start the questions now. I'm seeing several here that have popped in. How to best learn strategy in depth is the question. And what would you say are must-learns for this? Counterintuitively, I would say read Good Strategy, Bad Strategy. Don't read a book on UX strategy quite yet. I think that you need to really grasp what strategy is first. So that's what I would say, because too many people really don't get what strategy is. As I said, half of the ones that I look at that are from CEOs don't get it either. Good Strategy, Bad Strategy is a very engaging read with lots of examples of bad and good strategy. So I would start there. That's what got me the most excited. So yeah, that's where I would say. See one that says, is becoming UX strategist to designer who wears product owner role and think like business more? It sounds to me that hand in hand with business partner, though, this is not a solo work. No, it's not a solo work. The titles, I wouldn't get too hung up on it. You can call yourself whatever, strategic designer, design strategist, UX strategist, whatever it is. You can just call yourself a strategist if you can pull that off. I would probably do a strategy before I did that. But anyway, I wouldn't get too hung up on the titles. In the course, I teach about the UX strategy stack, the difference between UX strategy, product strategy, and business strategy. Those are ones you'll have to deal with a lot. Just search UX strategy stack, Fountain Institute. You'll find that. That's kind of what maybe you're asking about. Like, how do I know the difference? And I think it's good to know the differences between different types of strategy, but I would not get too hung up on it. You can call it the watermelon strategy, and you can put a lot of UX thinking into it, and it can be more impactful than saying, hey, look, UX strategy. I don't know how interested you would be in a growth strategy if you're not working in growth. So consider that when you're trying to pitch this internally, you may have to change the name into something a little bit more attractive. They're not super into UX. Oh, okay, here's another one. And here, if we already have people doing business and product strategy, how do you position yourself as a UXer wanting to do strategy? Let's go back to those 3 tracks. I would consider there's many ways to improve a strategy? And this is a common question because a lot of you might have a strong product strategy, and then UX strategy might be too competitive with that. I think what you can do is consider yourself as doing these things to improve the product strategy. So feeding insights into the product strategy, just doing research to double check. Whenever you're doing research for something else, kind of throw in a question or two, consider the product strategy. Do workshops, run strategy workshops where you just look at the product strategy and do work on it. That simple. Like just reminding people of it will get you a lot of points inside the organization. And then running experiments. So everything you're doing, consider it as a test of the strategy. So that's, I would consider this 3 tracks. Can you feed insights, qualitative insights? Can you do workshops, and can you feed data into that product strategy to improve it? And I think that's every designer has, every UXer has that agency already. So it's not going to be too controversial. I'll take a few more questions. Well, I think we'll go to the end of the hour. What's the best way to start practicing UX strategy when you don't have any relevant client work to practice on? For example, you can practice UI by copying designers. So what can you do to practice the UX side? When I have students who aren't employed, who are between jobs, they ask the same question: who can I use as my client? The thing is, it's much easier to use your own company or a client you've had recently because you already know stuff about them. It speeds the process of research up. But you're not limited at all by picking some company you want to work with and working on a strategy for them. So you could do that. It's just that I've noticed that a lot of people lose motivation when the client's not real or super relevant. So I would try and find someone that is close to your work, maybe a friend, would be better, a friend who's considering to start a company, and just say, hey, I want to work on a strategy for you, learn your strategy through that. So you want to be motivated. So having something you really care about that's real and as real as possible is what I would recommend. Oh, great. We have one from a design strategy manager. As a design strategy manager re-entering the workforce, how do you best find these roles in the midst of all the tactical UX jobs and demonstrate design strategy experience in a portfolio? A lot of people make the joke that like UX strategy is just service design by another name and with some fancy branding. So they might be called service design, innovation consultant, where strategy is not in the title. So be open to that. I'm kind of in the same situation where if I look for jobs now, I look for player coach roles. I would prefer strategy, but like I like working in-house. So I know that there's a lot of opportunities to work on strategy when you're in-house, and because it's likely no one else has the experience or the ambition or desire. So you'll find if there needs to be strategy that you can be the one. So that's where I got the most, I did like 3 projects and strategy projects that way. And I haven't done it at an agency, and maybe you find that role. It could be called a UX strategist, it could be called a strategic designer. But I've noticed that a lot of UX strategists don't ever even create a strategy, and that they just do strategic looking stuff like the thing that I talked about with Zoolander. So I don't know. I think that you should look for jobs where secretly you can find a way to do UX strategy and get that practice. And I think service design jobs that are kind of player coach roles that aren't manager sometimes can find it. Every manager should have that opportunity. So if you want to get a manager job, that will be much easier. But yeah, there are different ways to get creative, and then you can pitch that project once you arrive. Another question: where do we find users for UX interviews or surveys because the client or the company almost never provide them? Yeah, I know it can be hard to access users. In the course, what I teach, your source of inspiration for this research here is something called the 3 Cs. So it's company, customer, and competitor. So you're used to researching customers, but you add researching company, researching competitors. So maybe you wouldn't lean too heavily on the insights that you get from the customers and lean more heavily on the insights you get from researching the company and the competitors. So like, for instance, you might not be interviewing people who are the non-gamers, but you might be looking at industry reports on where gaming is going and looking at what gaming console companies are doing and looking how you can differentiate. Like there's ways to get at those brilliant strategies by looking at different sources. But in general, as a UX strategist, you're zooming out a lot more than just the user. So if you don't have access to the user, maybe you can kind of turn that bug into a feature and just focus on the competitor and the company. I think that's all the questions. Feel free to add one more, if you have time, I think we probably cover one more question. I wish that we could make it where everyone could unmute and ask. Normally that's how we do it in class, but there was too many people in this call. So I appreciate you using the chat. The little emojis were really helpful for me to know if I was saying something interesting. I really do believe that you can't just learn it from a book or watching YouTube videos. You really have to dive in. It's a great excuse to get your UX team together. So if you maybe don't work with each other directly, maybe you're all on different product teams, just meet once a month for like an hour or two and just do stuff related to UX strategy. That's how I would suggest getting started. That way you're already doing it in a more collaborative way. So hopefully that helps. Feel free to grab some of those resources. And I really appreciate you coming out. It's been fun to give this discussion, and we will be posting this talk soon so you can rewatch the recording and kind of re-access it again. So thanks everyone.